Are retro video games useless? So, a bit of background on today's question. A few weeks ago, another YouTuber, SmashJT, made a video called Retro Video Games Are Useless, and essentially the TLDW version of that video is him talking about how he lives on the West Coast now, and whenever he goes and visits his parents in Boston, which is on the East Coast of the US, he always sees his old video game collection, tries to bring some back, but he's realized lately that retro video game collecting doesn't exactly make him happy, and he's debating if he should just sell off his collection. And this video clearly resonated with a lot of people. I've been seeing, I guess, the closest thing to that modern YouTube has to response videos to that. And it's been interesting because, for me personally, this video's come at a really interesting time. So before I go any further, hi, welcome to Stuff We Play. My name is James, and I am a weird and retro, formerly bearded man on the internet who recently took a bit of a break of YouTube for YouTube, I should say, for about a month. I should mention this in the off the cuff video because, well, I got engaged and I have a wonderful fiance and we were traveling and whatnot. But now I'm back in here to talk about weird and retro goodness. More so the retro side of things today. See, I like to show off weird hardware and whatnot, but what many may not have noticed, or maybe I just haven't talked about it, is that in the past year, I've sold off half of my game collection. Half my Canadian game collection. I too have parents down in the US and in Canada now. I have been for a few years now. And whenever I go to see them, I bring a checked bag and dedicate it just to putting stuff from that collection down there in it. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that though it's kind of Mary Kondo thing, a lot of those games don't spark joy, right? That's an old reference, but it applies here, the actual games I've collected aren't really making me happy or whatnot, and I think I've realized that. But before we get on any further, it's been a couple minutes, and I should probably give you a definitive answer on the question in this video. In general, are retro games useless? And the answer is no. From a historical standpoint, retro games are important because, like all forms of art, which video games are art, I think that debate's been long settled. It kind of tells us a lot about society. Video games tell you a lot about the people who make them and kind of society that made the people who made them like that. And not only that, but what's interesting about video games compared to, like, say, music or paintings or even movies, unless we're talking movies with high amounts of CG in them, is that video games are very much so limited by the hardware they're made for. So retro games are important to look at because it really kind of shows you what people had to work with back there. As I said, retro games are like little mini time capsules, and that's why I find them, even though I'm not collecting anymore, that's why I still just, as the weird history buff that I am, I find them so fascinating. But more so, I think that's why I gravitate towards weirder pieces of gaming history and whatnot. Retro video games are important because they're history pieces, and they tell you a lot about the people who made them and whatnot. And not only that, though, but I think it's important for people who really want to learn about games to kind of play them. Just kind of get an idea of what those games are, because they are much simpler than the games people are accustomed to today. That said, going to the retro game collecting side of things, which is the stuff that SmashJT's video touched on, that I think a lot of people disliked that video based on the title because they didn't realize that he wasn't talking about retro video games in general, he was just talking about retro video game collecting. There are many different ways to play retro games nowadays. There are the dubiously legal ones like emulation, we've all done it. In fact, there's even official emulation methods. Your Nintendo Switch Online NES games, your virtual consoles, your Mega Man Legacy collections, your Castlevania collections, those sorts of things. And those have made these games more accessible than ever before, which is nice as well because as time goes on, more and more of these older pieces of tech are either going to need maintenance to keep working or just going to stop working altogether. So, when I started collecting, I was a teenager, and it was something that was just fun and cheap to do. It's why, if you noticed the Pokemon channel, it's why I love Pokemon card collecting, because that's fun and cheap to do. And back then, I remember going to the flea market with my friends and finding like NES consoles for $5, Genesis consoles for for $10. I think there's literally a video I did on this channel back in 2016 or 2017 where we went to this flea market out in Cut and Shoot, Texas, because I lived in Texas at the time. And we actually bought an NES for $5. It was dirty as hell, but it worked and had the chords and a copy of Tetris inside. And while I'm sure it's still possible to find deals like that nowadays, they aren't nearly as prevalent. Like at that same flea market, there was a guy who was selling PS2 games for 25 cents each, 10 cents each if they didn't have the case. I've come to a point where I realize I only want to collect games I know I'll actually play, but more than anything else, games I'll actually play and either really like, or stuff that you just can't emulate, like Sega Saturn stuff. But even then, we're starting to get remakes and ports of Saturn games to consoles like the Switch. I had all these games that I wasn't playing, and I was looking at my backlog, and I was kind of getting a little anxious just looking at my gaming backlog. In fact, that's why I've even made myself take a break from buying any new games for the next few months, just so I can get through my backlog. And for those wondering, I'm playing both Miitopia and Final Fantasy XII: The Zodiac Age right now. Excellent games, but that's besides the point. And as well, I realized there are a lot of things I didn't need as well, even for games I really liked. If a game was both on Genesis and SNES, I'd play both, figure out which version I liked more, even just for a few minutes, and then sell the other version. I've gone from over 800 games to about 400 something, maybe 500. And even then, a lot of those have come in just as gifts from friends, or I've gotten a few channel donations, stuff like that. Back when I was really big into collecting, it wasn't the actual games that was making me happy, but the physical act of collecting. But the thing is, over time, collecting got more expensive, and I was getting more and more games I just wasn't playing, and I realized I'd stopped being fun. Well, let me give an anecdote. When I was a little kid, my dad and I collected toy trains. And I don't mean like model trains, no, just model trains. I mean like model trains made by like Lionel and American Flyer and whatnot from like the pre-World War II tin plate trains. And we loved doing it together. And that started getting more expensive over time and whatnot. And finally I moved out of the house. And even though my dad still has all those trains and whatnot, and the memories with them, and there's some that we'd never sell because we loved them, they've really gone up in value over time. My parents are retired now. So it didn't really hit me as hard as I thought it would. A couple months ago, my dad called me up and he's like, I'm thinking about selling off a lot of the trains. To be fair, model train collecting is even crazier than game collecting, and some of those train sets are worth tens of thousands of dollars now, even though we only paid a few hundred, and then he taught me how to wire and whatnot, so they've been restored and whatnot to working condition. I feel the same way about games. If it's not a game I actively want to play, I don't need it, unless it's something that can be a restoration piece, because it's something that I want to do more on the channel, because it's something I love doing my free time as restoring consoles, or if it's just something really weird. The more I think of it, I'm not really a game collector at heart. I'm a weird old tech enthusiast. I love owning consoles like the Game Wave, stuff that people don't really talk about, but I find fascinating because there's so much hidden stuff in them. I don't know, I'm kind of rambling. So, are retro video games useless? Well, to recap, I'm not a retro game collector. I used to collect. I don't really collect much anymore, but I do love retro hardware, and I guess I am technically a retro hardware collector because I love both playing with old consoles, seeing them kind of as time capsules, and also, just not only restoring them, but upgrading them. Not just consoles, but computers too. Like, I have a Commodore Amiga off, to the left of my studio, since that's the only place I had to set it up. I realize I'm not much of a retro video game collector. I still have a little bit of a collection, either stuff I think that I'll use for videos either here, or if it falls into certain categories, the Pokemon channel, or just stuff that I'll generally enjoy. Now, some of you are asking, what about you? Do I think it's useless or worthless for you to collect or play retro video games? Well, the funny thing about that is, to be blunt, I'm just a guy on the internet, and I've just been doing kind of this nice sit-down ramble response to Smash JT's video, and I can't answer that for you. You have to answer that for yourself. But that said, if you want to talk through it or let me know your thoughts on this, please let me know down in the comment section below, or if you do your own video on this topic, because please do so. I think it's great to kind of start a discussion like this on YouTube. Link it to me on Twitter or on the official Stuff We Play Discord. But anyways, I'm rambling a little bit. I'm horribly addicted to Miitopia right now, so I'm probably going to play more of that after I'm done recording. So with that, thank you all very much for watching. 2 more AOF documentaries, and for those, probably my most requested video, a PlayStation Vita buying guide, along with a couple potential collabs coming very soon. It's good to be back. This was a fun, off-the-cuff ramble, so before I ramble on more, thank you very much for watching. If you feel so inclined, support us, or support me on Patreon. I'm not going to use the royal us. But support me on Patreon, join people like Justin Chipman and the Golden Bolt. This has been fun. Join us on Discord and whatnot. Stay classy, and I will see you next time.